Okay, so I'm sure
Hi,
we'll have
Becky.
more
Hi,
people
O'Neill. Hi,
join.
Karen. Hi, Rachel. Hi, Hannah. Hi,
This
Jack.
could go on for a long time,
Hey,
Alan.
Paul.
We had like 100 people register for this
Hi,
talk. So
Becky.
that's going to
Oh,
take a long
God.
time, a lot of individual hellos.
Go
But
ahead.
since we're a little past 9:30, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So we are so thrilled to have Alan finally be the featured artist of the month. It's only taken 2.5 years to get here, to get him to agree to be the featured artist of the month. I am going to very quickly read an introduction of Alan, and then I'm going to let him do his thing and give his talk. So without further ado, let me introduce Alan. Born and raised in North Carolina and South Carolina, Alan Roberts traveled to Europe for a 1-month visit in 1974. First astonished by the beauty of the European architecture and its unity with the surrounding landscape, he then serendipitously met the former director of the Leo Marchutz School, William Wayman, whose unique teaching methods inspired Alan to enroll in the school in Aix-en-Provence as a novice painter in 1975. He was taught that an intensive study of the laws of organic wholeness and their repeated affirmation in the works of all great art could lead him toward his own unique vision. Roberts began teaching art history in 1982 and became director of the Marchutz School alongside John Gasparach in 1990. Alan continues today to direct the school and to teach drawing, painting, and aesthetics. All right, Alan, over to you.
Go. All right. Hello, everyone. Let me just see all the faces a little bit. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take you for a long walk through the 50-year history of me trying to graduate from the Leo Marchutz School of Painting and Drawing. I keep pleading with the board to let me have my diploma, but they won't do it. And this December I'll be celebrating 50 years as a student in the Leo Marchutz School of Painting and Drawing, which started back in December of 1974. I officially signed up in the school in January of 1975. So I'm going to share my screen, and then I'm going to go through a whole bunch of images. I know John Gasparach will be angry at me because he's like, you can't go that fast. We need to have a seminar on each image. We're not going to do that. I'm going to show a lot of images quick, just so you get a feel for the whole full Monty. And then we'll have time at the end. So as we go through, if there's a painting that you see that, oh, you'd like to talk about or see more of or whatever after I finish, just check it. And we can look at a few for a longer time after I get through this story. Okay. So now, if I can do this right, I'm going to share my screen. Yes. I had to start with this. This is Rose's favorite story because I came to France I was a psychology major and I taught school for a year. And at the end of the year, my great, lovely friend, Nanette Sloan Jenkins now, asked me to come to France with her to study French for a month. And I was like, I don't want to study French. And she said, well, we're going to go see Cat Stevens in Morocco too. And I said, oh, I'll do that. So we got on the plane. We came to France, to Paris. And we camped out in the gardens in Paris for the first couple of days. And Nanette got up the day after we were there and said, I'm going into town to see a great artist retrospective. Do you want to come? I was like, art? No, I don't. Art gallery? What is it? She said, well, it's a great artist and you should come see it. And I was like, well, who is it? I'm not into art. She said, well, it's a great artist. His name is Paul Cézanne. And, we need to go in and see the exhibition. And I told her, no, thank you. I'm going to stay in the tent and try to learn this Cat Stevens song. And so she went to the exhibition without me. And I did not go to the Paul Cézanne retrospective in 1974. And Rose last year found the catalog of the 1974 retrospective that I missed. and sent it to me as a present. That's how I started. And in any case, we went to the French program. And then ultimately, Nanette asked me to hitchhike to Aix-en-Provence to meet her boyfriend, which we did. And we met him in the Deux Garçons. And when we sat down, he was talking to this guy named William Wayman, who was telling the guy all about his art school. Nanette got really excited because her brother was an artist, and they decided to join up in the art school. And I was like, okay, see you later. I'm going to Ireland, have fun. At Christmas, they asked me back, and I came down here and walked into John Gasbratch's house, and there was David Sloan, a little young hippie kid from Union, South Carolina, reading War and Peace out loud with the other students in front of a fire. And I was like, what's going on here? And the next day they went painting, and I asked them, what should I do? Should I go into town to the market or something while they were painting? And John Gasprat said, no, you take this watercolor set and go under that tree and try to do a painting. And that was the first painting that I ever thought about doing. And eventually I went back to Germany and tried to do some little paintings in my room and decided to come and join up the art school in January of 1975. So when I started the school, I'd never painted before. And of course, that's why it says, what is this? And John said, that's a palette knife, Alan. And I was like, how do you use that? And he explained it to me. And I started working in the school as a student. And for those of you back in the good old days, you'll remember the school was very intense. We had art history for 3 hours on Monday, a model session in the afternoon for 3 hours. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, we'd work morning and afternoon, 3 hours in the morning and 3 in the afternoon, and a seminar on Friday, and then a 3-hour critique on Friday afternoon. So we were all breathing art all throughout those first years in the school as a student. It was incredible. As John says, the good old days. And so here is the first copy that I did in the Marchutz School as a student. I was very influenced and loved, of course, Van Gogh and Cézanne in the beginning. This is the first copy that I did of Van Gogh, self-portrait, and another first copy of a Van Gogh landscape. And then it was great in the good old days because in 1976, Billy and I were standing on a terrace, I'll never forget it, looking out into the evening light. And he said, Alan, it seems like the students are kind of bored. We need to do something. I know, we'll go to Venice. And that's what we did. We all went and got on a train without reservations and went to Venice and found a place to stay. And so before we went, I tried to prepare for it by doing a copy of this Guardi. And then I started working directly from the visible world, and it was a little bit harder than I thought. Doing copies were a little bit easier because the great masters brought some of the relationships up to the surface. In any case, I started working in the landscape. And this, God help me, is one of the first landscape paintings I did in 1975 of the church up in the Luberon Valley. And this, God help me, is the first painting I did in Venice in 1976. And here's one of the first paintings I did of the Chateau Noir in 1976. And this painting, I don't know why Sam really liked this painting. I don't know if he remembers, but this was one of the paintings that I showed in that first exhibition out in Beaurecaria in 1976-ish, I think. And another thing, we had great fun. We did it a little bit differently back in the good old days. We had 3-hour portrait sessions where everyone would do a portrait in 3 hours. This is one of the first portraits I did. It was so lovely because Sam and Billy and John would all work side by side with us in the studio. So we learned a lot from them as they were painting along. This is like one of the first portraits I did. And then a couple of years later, this is a portrait of my good friend Eliza, which I did back in as a student in the school. And another thing that was really exciting in those days is that Chris and John and we all lived at the Chateau Noir, and we'd go out and paint together. And here's a couple of little sort of 5-inch by 3-inch paintings that Chris Coffey and I did side by side up in the Vaucluse. We'd go up there in an old beat up car and paint the paintings and then go to a bar. As things went along, I started understanding a little bit of what, or at least thinking about things that Billy and Sam and Leo were trying to teach us. And one of the ideas that was really, I still use it to this day in the studio, everybody's heard it 1,000 times, is his story about the difference between a rose and a robot. What's the difference between a rose and a robot, Alan? I was like, I don't know. And he explained that a robot is a wonderful whole that is the sum of its parts, and that you can take it apart and fix it if it's broken, and you can put it back together again. And a rose is a different kind of entity because you can take it apart and count all the parts, but at least for the moment, we cannot put it back together again. And so that idea of organic wholeness in art and how sacrifice relates to that kind of idea came into my head a little bit. And at that point, I started doing some paintings like this, which are a little bit different from those first images. I was learning a little bit how to put things together. This is a painting of Chateau Noir, different from that last painting. And then a very light painting of a hillside village. And then one of my favorite from that period, a roadside up in the Vaucluse. Always sort of trying to understand how to make a whole thing. And here is a little painting. It's probably like 6 inches by 5 inches that I did in the woods in the Chateau Noir in 1989, I believe. And it actually was a painting chosen by the curator of the Musée Granet. And so the next little group is really talking a little bit about some of the exhibitions that were important to me back in the 90s and 2000s when I was really into trying to show paintings now since like 2004 when I had all the kids. I stopped trying to deal with the galleries, but that little painting showed in this exhibition in 1990, which was the exhibition commemorating the mountain. The mountain had caught fire, and so they did a Cezanne exhibition in 1990 about the mountain. And we all from the school were able to expose in that exhibition in the Musée Granet with these. You see the 3 paintings: Sam's painting of the mountain, Francois painting, and then a beautiful painting of John Gasprach. Eventually, that led to a big exhibition in 2000 about the school called the École Marchutz X 25 years. And 7 artists showed in that show, but we also had like, I think 50 or 60 alumni who sent paintings over from the United States, and they showed in that exhibition as well. And eventually I found a gallery in Charlotte, North Carolina in the late 80s. I think this was in show in 1992, the Gerald Melberg Gallery. And he was incredible because, as you see, he would do exhibitions for me and put me in the middle of all these big names, which was really fun at the time. So if I had a student that wouldn't listen to me, I would just show them this invitation. They would go, "Oh wow, you showed with Roy Lichtenstein. You must know something." But eventually, my kids, I had lots of kids, and I didn't really have time to show, so I stopped the exhibition situation. Although I've been in some group exhibitions over the years, but not many. I let go of the gallery scene. I just didn't have time for it. In the 90s, if you go back and look at like a painting like this, or this, I felt like I need some color because my paintings were kind of evaporating. So I thought about that a lot, and I did several copies. I've always done copies. This is a copy of a Turner, trying to up the ante on the color a little bit, and then the big painting of a Gauguin with lots of strong color. And then I got into a kind of a black painting of a Greek vase. And this was interesting because I love the painting, and I was trying to sort of, as you see, up the ante on the color, use more color, use black, but it's not black, it's really dark colors. And also it's a little bit of a symbol. If you see at the bottom, it says scripturally, "Under the auspices of," was the title of this painting, which is a little bit related to our long sort of chess match that the Marchutz School has had with the study abroad program that we had decided to work with over the years. It's always been rather chess matchy. And so this is kind of an image of the two of us trying to figure out how to get along. And some of the paintings that came out of that, trying to use stronger color. Like I said, I had lots of kids at the time, and I got sick of picking up all the toys and just decided to try to paint some of them every now and then. And some of the landscapes from that period. This is a painting across the street from the Chateau Noir and the Mont Saint Victoire in the rain. And then a large painting from Beaurecuria, which is a little bit different from that first painting from Beaurecuria. Trying to use stronger color. Oops. And a large still life. Also, during this time, at a certain point, I decided when I went to Venice to use oil pastels on canvas. That was another way, because I had a problem with white. My paintings the bad ones would really get chalky. So I tried to use oil pastels on canvas for a while, which kept me away from the white and helped me have stronger color. And at the beginning of the 90s, also, in all their great wisdom, the study abroad program decided that I needed to have an MFA if I was going to keep teaching in the art school. So I had to find an MFA that was a low residency program. And I found one in Vermont. And basically, you went there twice a year for 10 days, and then all the artists from all over the United States would go back to their hometowns, and they would do their projects in their hometown and then go present their projects. Incredible people. I met such incredible people in the program. They were from all over the United States. It was just glorious. But one of the issues was that the program was, I mean, it was actually a good issue. I decided to go, I wanted to go to this program because their philosophy was a very postmodern philosophy. So the director of the program had just done his latest exhibition where he photocopied 1,000 copies of his hand and hung them up in the gallery wherever he was showing. And most of the art advisors were from around New York City, and they had a very postmodern take on things. Art is dead, God is dead. nature is dead, and the only thing left was sort of the commodity of the Coke can. And so when I went over and showed them my little paintings from the Chateau Noir, they were like, you can't do that. You can't paint in Paul Cézanne's town. You can't even paint in the landscape, much less painting in the shadow of Paul Cézanne. And I was like, well, I've been doing it for 20 years, so I guess I can. And that started the dialogue with them. It was hilarious. Over the 2 years, first of all, I got there, I had a Southern accent, so that made them a little squeamish. And then I was from France, and so a lot of the art historians, either they loved me because I was from France before they even spoke to me, or they didn't like me too much because I was an elitist from France, and they didn't really know what to make of what I was doing. And we had to write essays. So my first essay was on Leo Marchutz. And at the end, we had to propose our essay to our advisor. And my advisor told me, oh, this is such a wonderful essay. You could probably publish it. The only problem is you're writing about somebody that shouldn't be written about. And Leo Marchut's not really worth your time. So you can't write on him in the second semester. You have to write on somebody else. They were very arrogant. She wrote something like, if I'd read your paper and not seen his work, I would have been ready to put him in the Louvre and the Metropolitan when the next batch came out. And so, but when I see the work, there's nothing there. So I had to go back and explain to her that he was already in the Louvre and already in the Met without her help. That was one issue. But in any case, it was really a godsend because John and I discovered Giacometti in a great Giacometti exhibition in 1992. And so my second essay was on Giacometti, and that really affected the way I was working. But first of all, mainly what they could only say to me is, you need to paint larger, because I was bringing over like 6 and 7 figures from the landscape. They didn't know what to make of it. So I did. These are big 1 meter or 130 figure paintings. I guess it's like 92 by something of this White House. This is the first one. And I was also trying to work rapidly. This is a second one. And at the same time, I was writing on Giacometti, and I did a portrait project for the MFA. This is one of the self-portraits I did. I did a lot of self-portraits, a lot of portraits. This is one of the first ones. This is a portrait of Madeleine, a friend of mine at the Chateau Noir. But once I got into Giacometti, it kind of changed the way I thought about things. And eventually, toward the end of the session, I did this self-portrait, as you see, that's kind of an ode to Giacometti, and this portrait of Madeleine, which changed the way that I was seeing a bit. And eventually, it was really funny because the art advisors really didn't, like I said, they didn't know what to make of what I was doing. And on the last day of our last session together, there was like a 2-foot snowstorm in Vermont, which snowed us all in. And it was beautiful because the roofs in Vermont, in Montpelier, are very vertical. And when you have snow on the roofs, it really brings them to life. So I was walking around just enjoying the snow, and all of the New York advisors were huddled around their computers. They didn't really see the snow because they were too busy trying to figure out how to get flights out of Vermont to go back to New York after Mother Nature had messed up their plans. Ha ha. So anyway, my first essay was on Leo Marchutz, and my second one was on Giacometti. And the last one, you had to place yourself in the postmodern world. And so I kind of did a parody on postmodernism. And the name of my essay was Southern Liberal from Southern France Takes the New York Subway Through the Snows of Vermont, a Postmodern Dilemma. They actually, because I wrote it well, they didn't really agree with what I was saying, but I did graduate. I got my union card. During that time, let me move these pictures over a little. All of us around 1995 to 2000, I think Sam had gone back to Florida and Billy had gone back to the United States, but we were still in contact. And I would say maybe four of the most important aspects of what we were talking about related to these four artists. Monet became very important to us in terms of what it means to have a still point in the turning world and becoming very intimate with nature and working from the inside out. As you all know, Monet went all over the place, painting the steam and the snow and the bridges and the Venice and everything else, but ended up his life just looking at one flower in his water lily pond. And that affected a lot of how we were talking about what we were trying to do. And of course, there was Kakashka, who was very important in terms of the school in relation to trying to be spontaneous and what does spontaneity mean in terms of a modern conception. And of course, there's Leo Marchutz, whose use of the white surface has been on our minds for many years. And of course, Cézanne's statement of the more one looks at nature, the more one's eye becomes concentric. So at that time, one of the paintings that I worked from this motif a lot, but this is the green flag, where I tried to focus very profoundly just on the flag and trying to see how things turned around. This was when I was learning sort of how to look sort of deeply into one point and letting things in the peripheral spin around that deep look into a particular spot. And over the years, I came back to this motif several times in different ways. This is fun because you can see the piece of paper where I'm taking out one of the strokes in the painting. That became an element in the school. We used little pieces of paper to fix paintings over the years, little colored pieces of paper. But this was done maybe 2 years after I did the first one. And here's another one, the same motif. And several of the kinds of paintings I was doing in Venice at that time. This was from the Giudecca, and there's a greenhouse. You see the greenhouse to the right, which became a motif for me over the years, as well as the Redentore. And then a closer motif out on the Giudecca, trying to deal with all of those ideas in some kind of way or another. In 2001, we found these beautiful houses in Giverny. And so from 2001 until 2019, we would go to Giverny and work every year for 8 days with the students. And I was sort of working in two kinds of different ways. One was working really rapidly, trying to, grab everything all at once. And then another way was very slowly, one kind of tiny stroke at a time. So just to give you an idea of a few of these paintings, this is from a view in Giverny, where I'm trying to get everything down as fast as I can. And in the gardens in Giverny, going at it very rapidly. A couple of images of the same motif in the gardens in Giverny. And at that time, fell in love with my beautiful Kathleen, the poor thing. I'm not very good at likeness. It doesn't look anything like her, but I do think I captured a little bit of her heart, her great heart. This is a painting that I like of my beautiful Kathleen in that period. Then here's another motif in Giverny of a tree. I've got several paintings of it. This was kind of a mixture between going very slowly and going very rapidly. And also, here's a painting where I'm thinking a lot about trying to activate the white surface as much as I am the strokes to see what would happen. And this is a hillside on the river in Giverny. And eventually, I sort of moved in certain years more toward a kind of a jazz way of just putting one stroke very calmly down after another and just trying to make sort of jazz riffs using a lot of the white surface. Oops. And then I started using squares, which was fun, which changed the way I saw things. Usually we've got two here, so you can see this orange stroke here, or sort of my eye was resting right here on this orange stroke out there in the landscape. And here it was up here around this little blue stroke, sort of trying to come up with different little songs. Another part of my process, I guess, is really series paint, doing the same painting of the same spot over and over again. So from 2000 to 2020, I would go to Venice every year and set up every morning in the same spot. I found this motif out in the gardens. And so for every year when we go to Venice, I would go and set up in this spot from 9 o'clock until 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock. And I would usually draw a little bit and then pace around a lot and then mix the palette and then finally do the painting rather rapidly. But I decided to go back every year. So I've got several different renditions of the same motif, trying to do or see or develop different kinds of ways of seeing that same spot. Different renditions. This one is trying to, again, use the white of the surface in a particular kind of way. This one's trying to use the white of the surface in another different kind of way. I probably have like 70 paintings of this motif. This is just a few of the different ones that I did over the years. And one day I started this painting and they just decided to stop. It's probably one of my favorite ones because it activates the white surface in a way that I really like in relation to some of the ideas that Leo's work brings to us. And then these last images are from 2020 during the pandemic to 2024. As you know, in 2020, we left the study abroad program that we were working with, and now we're working independently. It's so lovely because we have a Atelier Libre here in Aix. We're working with like 50 or 60 French students from Aix, which is really lovely. And it's also, we're working again like we worked back in the early days from when we were independent. As Sam says, I'm not sure the Marchutz School was really ever cut out for academia, and I agree. But it was so lovely the last few years. And Sam and Paul and John and Barry and Patrick are the board of the school now, and they've been so supportive. But during that year, this is a tree in my backyard. When COVID hit, we couldn't move anywhere. So I spent a lot of time just in the backyard working from one of the trees that were back in my backyard. And I also continue to do copies. I really got into Titian, two different Titians, but one of them is this mother and child. And I was just playing around with it and not really doing a forgery. This is a copy from that reproduction, one copy using a lot of the white surface, and then another one which is a little bit darker, a little bit wilder. But that color harmony kind of affected the way that I work from the landscape. This is a view from my window at my house, my lovely house up in the north side of X now, of the cathedral. One view, and this is another one. I really like this painting. This painting is done from my sister's house in North Carolina, Swansboro, North Carolina. Emerald Isle actually is, well, she lives in Swansboro. She has a beautiful porch that looks out onto the river and the ocean, which I work from. When I go there, I work there every year when we go visit in August. And sometimes we go to Camp du Domaine down on the coast here in the Mediterranean. This is a recent painting from our steps of our little cabin at Camp du Domaine. And the new painting of the Chateau Noir. And finally, a sunset painting from Venice. I love this painting because when I was doing it, we had a group of students that I was teaching while we were there. So they were all painting around me, and I would paint for 10 minutes and then go help them with their painting for 10 minutes and then come back and paint for 10 more minutes and then go back and help them. And probably because I was helping them, I came up with something that was not as sort of, I would say some of those paintings back in when I was trying to use strong color were a little more conventional than this one. This one is maybe a little more conventional than some of the others, but I still like it. And now I'm not really thinking, when I work, I'm not thinking too much about all those big ideas that we can talk about, but really just trying to look out there and paint what I see. First of all, try to have a vision and then paint that. And that's what I'm trying to do. It's difficult. It was a lot easier in 1975, that's for sure. But that's what I got. So, questions?
Thank you, Alan. Big virtual round of applause for Alan. Thank you so much.
You're
That is
welcome.
so great to see so many of your paintings. I don't think I've seen that many of your paintings ever. So fun. Do you want to stop sharing so we can see everyone's faces for question time?
Sure,
That might be the best thing.
unless they want to look at a painting.
Yeah, we can do that too. So how we can do it, since there's so many of us on this Zoom, if you want to ask a question, just go ahead and unmute yourself and start speaking. And if we get too many people all at once, maybe we can start raising hands like in the screen like this, or you can, if you're a Zoom whiz, you can do the raising hand thing on Zoom. But if anyone
Yeah,
has questions or comments,
that was a race, okay, through all of those images. But if anybody wants to, go back, dwell on one, we can, or questions, or whatever.
let's see. King David, you have a question. Go for it.
Yes, I do. Hello, hello. That was fantastic. Great to see you. Great to hear your voice. Great to hear some history. Feel like I'm back in class right now. I don't want to waste any time. I want to get right to it. One of my favorite stories that you ever told, Mr. Alan Roberts, was of a a studio visit you had, or a critique session that you had with Leo, where you put up a whole bunch of, and I don't want to tell the story. I would like for you to tell it, and I would like to hear it just in the context of the greater talk that you just gave about your evolution of your relationship with color.
Yeah,
Specifically because if I know you know the story I'm talking about, where Leo said what he
yeah,
said to you, your sense of color. I would love for you. I would love for you to share that, and then also if you'd like to speak a little bit more about what place that conversation and that the conversation you guys had over time had with your relationship with color.
yeah. Lovely. Yeah, I cut that one out. So when I was a student in 1975, one day, uh, Leo agreed to give me sort of a critique of my work in his studio. We had group critiques every Friday, but of course I wanted more. And so, I talked him into, he was like, okay, you can bring your paintings to my studio. So I brought all my paintings and my drawings. I must have had like 20 paintings or 30, I don't know how many, a bunch of them, lots of drawings, and I set them all up. And Leo looked for a while and he said, you will not have any problems that, except for the ones that all artists have. You have a very good conception of cool and warm colors. Keep working. The end. And I was like, that's it. I went away going, that's it. He didn't critique every stroke that I made from all of my wonderful paintings. But, that one statement stayed with me for years and years and years, because one of the things that Leo talked about a lot was, in a strong painting, there's a certain balance between warm and cool cool colors. A painting can be too cool, or a painting can be too warm. And he was really upset with a lot of the paintings that were coming out at that period, where they were sort of crying out with all of these really warm colors, and the paintings were jumping off the surface. And he used to say, a good painting is 75% cool and 25% warm. And that one idea, in relation to actually the Light of Provence, that's one reason why the Light of Provence is so striking, because it has this wonderful balance of warm and cool colors that makes the light really special. I mean, for instance, the light in Florence is really beautiful. Nothing wrong with it. It's lovely, but it in relation to the Light of Provence, it goes a little bit to the yellow side. And then when you go to Paris, you have this beautiful, cool gray light that's different from the Provence. And in the Provence, you have this kind of perfection, this Greek perfection of warm and cool colors. So that one statement, after I got over, my ego of why didn't he tell me anything else, I realized, wow, that was an incredible statement that he told me, and it stayed with me until today. And that's the way Leo was. Very, very simple, but very profound. And so that is one of the things that's always on my mind after I do the painting, not during, but after. Is it too warm? Is it too cool? Is there a harmony there? Yeah.
Lovely. Nick, do you want to ask your next question?
Yeah, that'd
Hey,
be great.
Nick.
Hey,
Hi, Nick. How you
how
doing,
are you?
buddy?
I'm great. It's so great to hear you tell these stories.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you're getting around to doing one of these artist talks. I almost want to have story time with Alan more regularly now. I was getting ready just a moment ago, and I was like, this would be my favorite podcast, my most listened to podcast on Spotify. If
Oh
I could
yeah, we
have
got
one.
lots. We should do that. We'll have to get a podcast doing, tell stories. We got lots of
Yeah,
stories.
man. Yeah. I have a question.
Yeah.
And I was listening to you speak, and I wrote down you said that you and John discovered Giacometti.
Yeah.
And I want to hear more about
Oh,
that because for me, when I have studied at the school, I arrived and it felt like, okay, these are the artists you need to know about. Like the cast had been chosen. So hearing you go through your time studying at the school and discovering one and adding one is like, hang on a second, like they added one, they added someone to the cast.
yeah, right.
So
That
tell me
happened.
more, tell us more, please. Tell me more about discovering Giacometti. I want to hear more about that.
Okay, but I'll start with even something more incredible. Sam can back me up on this. In the beginning, in the school, Cezanne was, he's the father of modern art. And a lot of what we were going through at the time was was that in relation to everything that else was going on in the past. And in the beginning in the school, there was a sensation that Cezanne was the greatest, and Monet, for example, was really good, but he was kind of decorative, That was a little bit Billy's take. And, we would go to Paris and we would look and we would think, you know, Monet's okay. But then we discovered with continued looking and also students uh, seeing things in the Monet, which totally changed our relationship to Monet. As far as Giacometti is concerned, I mean, we knew about Giacometti, and mainly we knew about the sculptures that Giacometti did, but I didn't know, and I don't think John did either. When we saw the Giacometti retrospective in Paris in 1992, we, with all of his paintings and all of his sculptures, I really had no idea at the time about Giacometti's paintings. I knew about his tall sculptures a little bit, but I didn't know that much about him. And now we discovered that he is really the real son of Cezanne, actually, of everybody in the 20th century. Probably Giacometti understood more everything that Cezanne was talking about than anybody else. And his vision in terms of how he worked in relation to the 20th century and the kind of idea of, he made the tree for what's the name of the play? Rosenstantz and Guildenstern. Yeah, he actually made the tree for that kind of existentialist play. So he had a much more of a vision, I think, that kind of placed us in a lonely place. We are alone in this big world. And he said, if I could only paint an eye, if I could paint an eye, I would be able to paint the whole world. So he had a very different take on how to go about things than Cezanne did, but he was basically, in terms of seeing, the son of Cezanne. He was a surrealistic. He was the leader of surrealism. And one day he went to do a drawing from a model to get an idea for a sculpture, and he realized that he couldn't do it. And he spent the rest of his life working directly from nature, sort of pushed aside all of his surrealism, and then worked for the rest of his life from the visible world. And I mean, I think, again, his vision was much more of a kind of existentialist modern conception than Cezanne the Catholic. So that changed the way he saw space. That changed the way he saw people in space. And that affected a lot of what we were trying to do at the same time. That answers your question. Is that what you have another question?
No, that's great. I mean, I just hearing, I wanted to hear the experience of discovery from your eyes and
Yeah.
your mind, and that was it.
Oh yeah. It was a total eye opener. Giacometti filled up the Modern Art Museum in Paris with his paintings and his sculptures and his small little sculptures that he did. And eventually, then Yves Bonnefoy wrote, I don't know, 500 big, huge tome on Giacometti, a masterpiece of art history. And so that came out, and that was really important too. And so when I was doing the MFA, I really got into Giacometti in a big way.
Great. And so just to clarify, you knew him for sculptures first.
Yes.
You knew about the sculptures, and then
Yes.
you came into the rest of just seeing it in this retrospective. Is that?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
We hardly ever talked about, I mean, Sam can correct me, but we would go down to a museum. There was a museum down on the coast, and we would go down there, and there were a couple of Giacometti sculptures in there, which we would see and admire, but it really wasn't that much of his vision wasn't that much in our dialogue as we went through the years until 1993, 1994. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
O'Neill, do you want to ask your question next? You'll just have to unmute yourself.
Sure.
If you're still muted. Yeah, there you go.
Hey, Alan.
Yeah. Hi, buddy. How you doing?
I'm all right. Always a real pleasure to listen to you talk about painting. You said something right at the end that I was curious to hear you talk about a little bit more. What you put up that painting of the sunset in Venice, uh, and then you mentioned that although I don't think this is particular necessarily to that painting, that rather than thinking about all the theories and all the this and all the that, you are trying to paint what you see. And then what you said was actually to have a vision and then to paint that. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that having a vision means, as opposed to just looking around and seeing something pretty and painting it.
Well, I mean, for me, most of the time, before I start a painting, not all the time. That's why what I was talking about in Giverny, okay? Most of the time before I start painting, I try to see a whole thing with my body and my eye. And then start painting. So that's what I try to do. Sometimes that gets in the way though, because I would say if I look at this painting of the sunset in Venice, okay, I think that painting is, quote, a little more conventional than, say, something like this one. But, I don't know. It's really hard to see and talk about your own work. But for instance, in this painting, I feel like that vision that I'm talking about of a whole thing comes from looking deeply into one point and then letting the vision organize itself around looking deeply into one point. So in this painting, I was looking deeply into that little red vertical thing that's at the end of the canal up right here. And the organization of the painting grows out of that, hopefully, but other times I don't really have a total vision in the beginning. Like if I look at some of these little things, if I look at that painting is much more sort of, okay, I'm gonna, work slowly, stroke by stroke, but it's still related to seeing a whole thing turning around that orange area right there. I don't know. Does that answer your question or what?
I think so. In terms of, I'm curious in terms of like the difference between this one where you went more slowly, stroke by stroke, versus the ones where you tried to get it all down. Knowing you that we're still talking about a difference between like a couple of hours or maybe 4 or 5 hours, and I'm wondering if part of that having a vision and then painting the vision is also related to sort of what painting rapidly brings to the table.
Yeah, for me it does.
Everything before
For me
before
it
it
does,
goes away,
but
before you lose it.
not everybody, not everybody works like that. John doesn't work like that. Sam doesn't, I don't think. Sam's most recent paintings are incredibly seen, and there's a whole thing there, but he's not racing to get the painting on the surface as fast as he can. I don't think. He'll have to answer for himself, but it doesn't seem like his paintings has that same kind of, there's a spontaneous quality to them, but there's not this kind of rush job, which is, there's different ways of doing it. For example, I like this painting because it's a combination of the subject matter. It's not just going off and doing any old thing. It's, there's a love for what's out there, but there's also a love of trying to express a certain human vision. Okay, I'm trying to get something down so that when people look at this painting, they get a kind of, oh, I'm not sure what's going on, but it seems true.
Thanks, Alan. Cole, do you want to go ahead and ask your question? You'll just have to unmute yourself before you start speaking.
Hi, Cole.
Alan, how are you doing?
Hey. I'm doing all right, buddy. How are you?
I'm enjoying this. Fine.
I'm glad you are.
Wait,
No, I am too. I am too.
You're in the hot seat. One thing that's kind of interesting to me is when you had that one screen up where you were mentioning different quotes from, I guess, Cezanne, Monet, Leo, perhaps was on there. Anyway,
Yeah.
the one that caught my mind.
Is my screen still showing, Rose?
Particular was the first one because I'm a slow reader.
Is.
And actually, it was Cezanne at the bottom. Where he says the more one looks at nature, the more the eye becomes concentric. And I'm just curious because you've identified a couple places where you were, I would say, focused, perhaps for your own kind of concentric relationship, by identifying the orange in that one sort of landscape, and then that small touch of a warmer color in the Venice painting, and I was curious is when you talk about putting your eye and your body into your motif, I assume what you mean is you're trying to organize your thought about how the space becomes concentric, perhaps, to your sensibility, or you want to expand on that just a little bit as to how you interpret eye and concentric in relationship to painting?
Yeah. I mean, let me show this one, for example. Okay. Can you see that painting?
Now I can.
Yeah. So I'm not thinking about this when I'm painting. I mean, these are sort of ideas that we talk about and think about and discuss. So when I'm painting, I'm not, for example, I think in this painting, there's a real sensation of a concentric kind of vision going on, like right here. Okay, there's a turning that's happening right there.
Where are you? Your cursor's running all over.
Well, I'm trying to make a circle.
Oh, I see. I see it. Yeah.
That
Right.
there. Okay, around. So the painting is sort of showing itself more concentrically than it is first plan, second plan, third plan, back into the distance. There's a turning around things that's more concentric. I think that comes from, though, not thinking about it, but actually seeing into something more than looking at something. If that makes sense. Or
Well, I think
you know,
it makes sense to me if you put in kind of a, and I'm not trying to use fancy words, but if you put it into a context of experience or existence, which
yeah,
perhaps is existential, and maybe that's also what Giacometti is all about, is
yes,
having something to do with, I like to call it presence, where
yes,
you feel
yeah,
like you're a part of something.
yeah.
Um,
And I think um not just me, but as even as a group, one of the another idea, sort of this idea of perspective, sort of Renaissance perspective, where you have a particular way of how distance operates and things go back into the distance. And over a period of time, we are sort of looking at, because of what Leo gave us as well, sort of looking at a different way of creating perspective, that the perspective is much more related to seeing something from the inside out rather than the outside in, which is, nothing really that new. If you think about Monet, his haystacks paintings are really wonderful, but they're seen a little bit more from the outside in when you relate them to what he did with his water lily paintings at the end of his life. There's an interiority in his late paintings that are not as that isn't as strong in his earlier paintings. So that's a little bit of, I hope, what's happening. But all of that, I'm not trying to think about that when I'm doing the painting. I'm thinking
well,
about it after the painting's done. Is it happening or not?
yeah.
Most of the time, not. I don't have, like I say, I've got like 70 or 80 paintings of this motif. Probably, 15 of them actually work, 15 or 20. The others are not so good.
I guess it would be a kind of an intuitive relationship with what you're painting. And by intuitive, then perhaps how you feel it unifies or creates this sense of concentric, I don't know, wholeness comes about?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, only time will tell. I mean, I'm not, I put this painting up here. I think this painting works as a whole thing. I'm trying to make, like Billy said, with, I'm trying to take my feeling, the canvas, the oil paints, what I'm looking at and what I'm feeling, and come up with a rose that is more than any one of those particular things, if that makes sense. Okay, I'm not really trying to paint, a scene from Venice. I'm actually trying to make a new organic being. And, with time, some of them might work, some of them not.
No, I
I
appreciate
know
that.
my friend Chris, he's like, Alan, would you just buy a big house paintbrush, please, and get rid of all those little strokey strokes? He wants me to cover all that canvas. So, we'll see with time.
Thank you.
Alan, I have a question for you. You've been now painting, like you said, for 50 years, and you've been teaching now for almost that long. How do you relate your own personal painting practice to your practice of teaching all these decades? Or how has it evolved also over the years? Your two sort of identities, on this featured artist website, you didn't just have an artist statement, but you had an artist
Right.
teacher statement.
Yeah.
How do your two identities, I guess, as an artist and as a teacher, and how do those two vocations, I guess, how do those interrelate with each other in your life, and how has
There's
that
a lot.
relationship evolved?
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about there. Okay, because a lot of people say, oh, well, you spend all your time teaching and not working, and so you're not really making as much progress as you could if you were working all the time. That may be true, but I also feel like as a teacher, I've learned a hell of a lot about painting from working with others in terms of trying to think about their own painting and helping them get better and getting them to look at other great masters. And so part of my teaching, I think, has affected positively my own artwork. Whether my artwork would be a lot better if I never I don't think it would be, because I've learned so much as a teacher that I wouldn't be, I don't think, as far along as I am now because I have been teaching. I mean, technically, or, being totally original or those kinds of things maybe would have come more if I had just painted, but, that's not what I am. I think also, if somebody said, oh, are you a master? I think I would, without, too much ego, I think I could say I'm a master teacher. I feel much more in that I, know what I'm doing when I'm teaching than when I'm painting. So, there's those two things too. I'm a really good teacher and maybe a mediocre painter, but that's okay.
Thank you. Other questions for Alan or comments? You'll just have to unmute yourself if you want to shout something out.
Yeah, Alan, this is Barry. This painting that you have up now is not mediocre. And
Okay.
I really appreciate the concept of presence as well.
Yeah.
I talk a lot about social change and everything, but to bring about social change, we need to be present. And I think your art and art at its best allows us to know what presence is. So thank you.
Thanks, Barry. I mean, that's part of as you know, because you're the teacher, we've tried to integrate that kind of idea into the school. Lots of times this idea of social change people don't really understand that, well, you're going out into the landscape as a kind of nostalgic, alone person, trying to work. What does that have to do with social change? But if you can come up with the painting, I think that shows a connection between a human and the landscape, and what that image can give to somebody, I believe that can, as an element of social change, that can affect how people relate to each other, because it's painting, as Leo says, is a maximum number of relationships. That's what it is. And so if you can show relationship, that can help people think about what that means.
Nicely said. Thank you.
Hello. It's been so great to see you and see the progress of paintings. I find it so fascinating how much the white of your canvas emerges. And I just wanted to add on to that presence. That was one thing I really took from this, is that painting has helped you to become more present. Especially when you said when you were in Vermont and everyone was trying to figure out how to get back home, and you were just appreciating the moment. that really struck me. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Hannah.
Yeah.
I mean, can you see that image?
Yep.
So I almost didn't put this one in. I put it in because it's sort of related to the color harmony of the copies that we're doing, because probably I would say the white of the surface isn't as organized here, back to even what can't think of his name now. Who was talking a minute ago?
Yeah.
I don't.
Barry.
Was it Barry or Cole?
Cole, yes, thank you. Cole, yeah, in terms of what Cole and I were talking about, I put this one in here, but I don't think that the white surface actually is as organized as it could be in this. There's a nice feeling in the sky, and there's some nice things, but it's probably a little jumpy, in terms of what we were talking about, Cole, in terms of things coming together as a whole thing. I think the white surface, for instance, in this painting, or this painting, or any of those paintings, but the way the white surface operates here might be a little bit stronger than the one I was just showing. But thank you for your comments. The white surface is, as we all know, trying to figure out how to use it or not use it. A big part of my process anyway.
Other questions, comments for Alan? Just remember to unmute yourself. I know I'm a broken record saying that, but.
Oh, can I say something?
Please.
Okay, Alan, you're like a natural. When you showed those first paintings you did, and you didn't even want to go see Cezanne's. I'm like,
yeah.
Oh my God, Alan, you are a natural. You were born to paint. And I think you're too modest, because yeah, you're definitely not mediocre. But yeah,
Well,
I'm really
I
glad.
know. No, I'm a good painter, but I'm not. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's okay. I'm just
yeah.
not. I'm more of a master teacher than I am. I'm not there yet as a painter. I'll get there, but you
Yeah.
know, yeah.
But yeah, when you're talking about how you go for 10 minutes and then you go back to yours for 10 minutes, and I've seen you in that realm, and it's amazing what you do. So I've enjoyed
Oh,
your
thank you, Susan.
whole presentation. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
You're
Thanks,
welcome.
Susan.
You're wonderful.
You're welcome.
Cole, do you have another question?
Am I on? I guess I
You
am.
are.
Okay. I want to talk just or add to the comments that have been spinning around Alan's efforts to do a critique of his use of white or of the white of the canvas. And I always remember Billy and maybe Sam, if he's here, he could correct me, but also Leo, of course. Whenever they seemed to talk about white, they always made me feel like they were identifying both the natural lightness inherent to a blank canvas or a blank piece of paper, and the extent to which that was perhaps not only a kind of physical light source if you were working figuratively or representationally, but it was also that spiritual light source that perhaps comes back to this notion of being present or having presence in working from nature. And
yeah,
I don't know where I'm going with this, but I just feel like that's always what I took the white of the canvas as being when I had the privilege of talking with Leo. And for me, it's hard to keep the light of the canvas in my paintings. I tend to just overwork them to death, and I have to put a light on in a kind of dramatic or something. But anyway, that was what I always felt was what they were telling me.
Well, yeah, Leo is a killer, okay? Because wow, you're trying to paint and you're trying to do something, that's new and original and different. But if you think about Leo's paintings, first of all, I mean, he talked about it. He said, when Cezanne did his watercolors, he reversed the mystery, because the mystery used to be in the darks of a Rembrandt painting. The mystery was in the dark. And when Cezanne did his watercolors, all of a sudden the mystery was actually in the white of the surface. And then we have Leo. If you think about it, in Leo's paintings, first he did away with shadow in a way. When you look at his paintings, I mean, he intuits shadow with the way that he puts his paintings together, but really he's not in his paintings. They're lines, he's sort of done away with shadow and light. He's done away with the dark surface. He's done away with color. He hasn't done away with it, but he's done away with putting paint all over the surface. The curator, that's why the curators in X always say, oh, it's not a painting. Leo's paintings, they're not paintings, they're drawings, right? And I'm like, they are paintings, because each one of those lines are made up of like 2,000 strokes of color. He's just not putting the color where you're expecting him to put it. But, once that happens, it's hard to go back. If I go, for instance, if I show you this painting, okay? So, okay, that's kind of a fun painting, I guess. It's okay. There's lots of color and it's, it sort of holds together, but it seems old in relation to something like the one I was showing. It It just seems older. It seems like it lives much more in the 19th century than it does the 20th century. So, you know, that's one thing we're all trying to figure out, I think, is how to use the white surface or not use it. Sam has figured it out, but you know, if he's here, I don't know where Sam is. Sam, help me.
He was on here. He might have had to log off. I don't see him on here anymore.
All right.
He might have just hopped off.
No more people. Well, just see.
Any other questions for Alan or comments? We're getting to the end of 90 minutes, so we can wrap up here maybe with one last or two last questions.
Can I just ask one last thing, maybe?
Please, Sharon.
I really was struck by one of your Giverny paintings, I think, called Hillside on the River, something like that. I wonder if we could see that again.
That one?
Yes. It was followed by the one that was sort of a jazzy painting. You said something about jazz strokes. Yeah, those two. I thought the juxtaposition of those two was really interesting. And if you go back to the first one. For me, that's just another one of those paintings you were talking about that seems to have, I don't know if concentricity is the right term, but it seems to be a whole with a really wonderful sense of light. I just wanted to comment on that. And also, golly gee, this whole talk has just made my day, probably my week. And I'd be right up there listening to any podcast. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, Sharon. We'll have to get working on a podcast, Alan.
Yeah, and also before everybody goes, let me just thank Rose. She does an incredible job with what she does, and her and Kathleen together, they've kept this school going after we left the study abroad program that we left. And, you know, the way Rose puts these things together are incredible. The way she and Kathleen work is incredible. The way the board supports Barry, everybody supports that part of what I'm trying to do is just so incredible. We're still kicking, so that's good. Thank you, Rose.
No, thank you, Alan, for taking the time to put this beautiful presentation together. Another round of applause for Alan. Thank you. And this is all recorded, so I'm going to send it around in an email. Look out for that from me, and you can feel free to share the recording with your networks and communities. And thank you all for taking the time to join us today. It's been so fun. Alan, we're going to have to make this a regular thing.
Everyone. Yeah. We'll do more. So much, you guys. Hello to everybody out there that I can't see.
Thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
We've set records for the most well-attended artist talk.
All right.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye, all. Merci.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, Alan. Bye, Rose.
Have fun.
Bye, bye. Ciao.
So nice to see you all. Ciao.
Ciao. Why we don't have this?
Coucou, Michelle.
Hi, Rose. We can never be seen. I don't know why. It's always
no, it's your camera.
We see you, but my camera.
Oh, hey, Michelle.
Hi, Alan.